Welcome back. Classic Talk with Bing and Dennis. Today we're here in the studio speaking with Luca Pizzaroni. We're speaking of Don Giovanni, and well, speaking of Don Giovanni, what about Don Giovanni? Do you want to sing it one day, or?
Yeah, definitely. I'm still not convinced about, about the role in the sense that I'm enjoying Leporello a lot and I haven't sang it that much. So I want to explore it as much as I can. On the other side, I find that Don Giovanni is such a relevant role that I have to do it eventually. But it's a difficult role. I don't know anybody who sings Don Giovanni who actually is happy at the end of the performance. I had Erwin Schrott, Peter Mattei, Marius Kvichen, I had so many, Jaron Finley, I had so many. And at the end, somehow you feel like,
Well, you're kind of hot in the flames of hell at that
yeah,
moment.
but it's not that. It's just that at the end, you never know if you got the guy right. There is so much that you can, do with him in terms of acting and in which direction you want to go, And at the end, is a little bit always like you have more questions than answers, actually. And so, so I want to do it because it's really relevant and it's important, and I find that the cemetery scene in the finale is so wonderfully written that it's going to be such a pleasure to sing it and to have this confrontation with the supernatural. But I've been pushing it back a little bit, far away from, as far as I can. But I want to do it. Definitely, I want to do it. Yeah.
So Mozart, Rossini, and Bruch is your repertoire. So what's next, or you think you're gonna stay this way for a while?
No, there are really interesting projects coming up for me. I've been very careful in the first 10 years of my career because, I've been looking at all the successful singers, let's say, and they all have been incredibly careful. I mean, if you think somebody like Mirella Freni, she sang Zerlina and Susanna, and she ended up singing, Butterfly and Tosca and, and Don Carlo and all this, heavy repertoire. And I believe at the beginning of your career, unless you are born with this natural dark color, this dramatic color, you need to be careful because, if I make a mistake in Mozart and Baroque, the orchestra size is not that big. I will survive. There is nothing that will actually kill me. If at age 25 you start singing, for example, Filippo II, and you don't know what you're doing, that can kill you. Actually.
You won't be singing when you're 26.
That's the problem. You can sing Rinaldo and make mistakes as much as you want. It won't kill you. But if you make a mistake singing the heavy repertoire, I don't think your voice would be able to survive. And I believe nobody knows 100% what he's doing technically, artistically at age 25. There are some wonderful people, but there are very few, that have a knowledge of everything at one time. Otherwise, if I think of myself, how I sang 13 years ago or how I acted 13 years ago, I was okay, but I was still searching, and I think for me has always been to preserve my instrument and to make sure that when I was in the full, capacity of my technique and of my artistic development, I could actually sing the role that I wanted to sing. So I've been careful, and now I feel after 13 years that I can, do some experiment. And I did Maometto in Santa Fe 2 years ago. I will sing Sonnambula. I have Puritani coming up. I will have Faust Gounod. I want to do this, and I want to move into a heavy repertoire, quote unquote, because actually it's bel canto and French repertoire and Rossini, but I certainly moving into that direction.
Why do you want to right now? Because you are still...
I want right now because I feel it's the right moment for me to actually push my dramatic boundaries as a little bit. One thing that I have learned that actually you don't know what is right for you until you actually sing it. On paper you say, oh, this role is a little bit too heavy for me. But the truth is you need to actually study it and work on it, because sometimes you might say, yes, it's definitely too much for me, and sometimes you say, actually, this fits my voice incredibly well. And one thing I've learned after 10 years of Baroque is that Baroque is great, but the Baroque does not help you develop your instrument. Because especially for a bass baritone, there is never a sostenuto line. There is never a legato phrase. You actually cannot actually fully utilize your breath. You are so focused on keeping your voice slim
and fast,
and fast, and have this facility on going, this incredible range. Because if you sing Baroque for a bass baritone, you go from G's or F to F sharp or G up, so on the upper register. So you're so concerned to keep everything in aligned and everything so fast that you never have a moment to actually sing a long, fulfilling legato phrase. And so I thought after so many years I needed to do it. And in fact, my first experiment was actually the duet of Act One of Faust in Paris for a gala, Me Voici, and with Piotr Beczela as the tenor. And I thought he's going to bury me in sound. To be honest, I thought, look, it's a gala. I'll do it, let's see. And I thought he's going to kill me. In fact, he didn't. And I was incredibly happy because for the first time I could actually sing long phrase and let my voice go. So in that moment I understood that I needed, if I ever wanted to move into a heavier repertoire, I needed to start somehow. Mm-hmm. And that's why I did Paolo in a recording of Simon Boccanegra with my father-in-law, Thomas Hampson, and it was actually incredibly useful for me to do because Paolo is a major character, but he does not have to sing, 3 hours, right. And I thought I can, experiment and see, and that was incredibly useful for me to see that actually I could try to do something a bit heavier, and that's why I do it.
How do you control the temptation psychologically? Because there's just so many great roles out there,
I know, it's very difficult. It's like an addiction. And especially for me, I know the repertoire quite well because before being a singer, I was a opera lover all my life. So I know exactly the role I would like to sing and what I would like to do. But the question is, to me, has always been, can I preserve my voice? Can I have the best instrument I can possibly have at the right time when I want to sing the repertoire? And that's why I said no a lot of times.
But the people around you say, "Oh yeah, you can do this."
Yes. Yeah, but yes, with me, they understood that it doesn't really work with me. Because I turned down some offers which I thought were crazy, because I've been asked early Verdi, and I said, you don't go from, Baroque and Mozart to Verdi without doing any step in between. It's like people asking me to jump 5 steps, and I said there is so much in between that I can possibly do. There is all the Rossini serio, and then there is all the bel canto, Lucrezia Borgia, Sonnambula, Puritani, Anna Bolena, and then there is all the French repertoire that is actually really written for a bass baritone voice. So that's why I always said, I have so much to do before I want to get there. So, you need to know that you need to offer me something in the repertoire I want to sing before I will ever accept that.
Does the size of the theater, is it a factor when someone's asking you for something that's perhaps a little bit heavier than you'd normally?
Without question. And I see it every time, for example, when I'm here at the Met. Even Mozart, I sing Mozart completely different here that I could sing it in Europe, because it's a 4,000 seat theater, the recitative in Europe, I can, it's like a extension of my speaking voice. I can go, io teggio ad ogni patto per sempre abbandonar questo mal matto, and I know if I sing in Vienna or in Munich or in Zurich that they are going to hear it. At the Met, it's so big that I know I need to be more on my breath, and I would have to sing more legato to make sure that what I do gets, to the end of the theater. This, I'm not worried about this when I'm in Europe. And so if, and to be honest, when Vienna asked me to sing Anna Bolena, I said yes. And I would have never agreed to do Anna Bolena at the Met as my debut in the role. Now that I've done it in Vienna, I know that I could do a great job at the Met as well. And so I am careful, because obviously if you want to do a debut, you need to know, let's have a good size where I know that psychologically I don't feel like I have to push to fill the house, yeah?
You mentioned your father-in-law, the great Thomas Hampson.
Yes.
Does he give you vocal tips? Does he?
Yeah, of course. When I met him in Salzburg, I was, as I told you, 25, and I was singing Mazzetto, and he was singing Don Giovanni, and I was just right out of Conservatorio, and I got this chance to sing, in Salzburg, and I remember asking him 1,000 of questions a day, how he produced the voice, what he thought about the piani, and we keep talking about it. And I think it's nice to have this conversation and dialogue with him. Also because our musical sensitivity is very close. We feel about our voices pretty much the same. Our voice is an instrument that has to express what we feel about a specific situation, a specific role. So we try to have, our technique in check so that we can express our range of emotion, as much as we can.
You also have in common the fact that you both love doing recitals with pianists.
Yeah.
What is a typical program for your recital? Is there such a thing as a typical program, or do you ever do everything?
Look, I love, I always said I love depression and sad and I want to kill myself kind of repertoire. I could do an entire evening about, suicide, because that kind of music and the dialogue between the piano and the voice really speaks to me. As the sadder, the better for me, honestly. But in general, I see, being Italian, we don't have really a tradition of doing recitals. We do aria evenings. We don't do recital. But I always had a passion and a love for songs. I think they are wonderful, and I think this collaboration between you and the pianist is so rewarding and takes your musical satisfaction to such levels, I think, because sometimes when you sing opera, you probably have the best musical idea, and then the set is not really friendly, and the orchestra is huge, and the hall is huge, and all these colors that you want to make, you're like, I would like to do a piano here, but actually it's going to be a mezzoforte. When you're your pianist in a small venue, you can do anything, and everybody's going to hear it. So musically, it's incredibly satisfying. And I love the fact that this composer like Schubert and Liszt and Brahms and Schumann, it's a dialogue. I have a musical idea and then I give it back to the pianist and then it gives it back to me, and that's what I love about it.
And you send your audiences home wanting to kill themselves or being so sad from
No.
I
I learned that actually 90 minutes of suicide thoughts are not really what the audience wants to hear. So I think actually a balance between something witty and something funny and something, that moves you, it's the best. So I have been touring a program which has Beethoven's Reichert. Reichert is a contemporary of Schubert and put 8 Petrarca poems into music, and they're actually quite wonderful. And then I do Brahms, and the second half is Liszt. And I'm actually working a new program which has Mozart, Beethoven, Mendelssohn, and the second half is all Schubert. And so I love putting programs together. I could spend an entire week just looking for the songs.
Fun.
Yes. Looking for songs that I want to sing.
Do you think that reflect on your personality too? Because melancholy, sad and things like that. You think
Yes,
that?
and that's why I live in Vienna instead of living in sunny Italy. You know, I really feel at home in Vienna, but they have this love for tragedy. They do, and also the weather is not as
Yeah,
good
rainy
as
days.
a little bit, and you know, and I like that. If it really fits my personality. And to quote my wonderful wife, always says, for example, about Cenerentola, she says, "I don't like it. Nobody dies in this
Nobody
opera."
dies.
Oh, I
And
see.
I'm a little bit like this, you know. My typical opera would be Tosca. Everybody dies.
Now, speaking of that, on stage, acting, are you really into acting and singing in the same time? You know, there's certain people do that. You know, Bryn Terfel and the Kingly Side, they're all very good actors too.
Yes, it was always a part of my career. You know, you're not going to believe this, but when I used to, when I was a student, we did one opera, and I was stiff on stage. I mean, I didn't know what to do until one rehearsal. I went, you know what? What the hell? And I really said, you know, just do it. You know, just try to feel like your character would feel. And one thing I learned in Salzburg in this wonderful Don Giovanni was what Martin Kuge told me, which was the best advice a director ever gave to me, because has ever given to me. Because he said to me, singers are so worried about what comes next. Instead, they should be worried what happened before. So he said to me, listen and react to what you just heard. And this really changes the way that you are on stage. Mm-hmm. Because actually, especially in recitativi, I don't think, oh, I have to say this. I'm listening to what my colleague says and hear it like it's the first time I hear it, and then react to it like it's the first time. And that changes everything, because then it feels like you're actually creating something in the moment. And for me, acting, it's an essential part of being a singer. And I have to be honest with you, when I make a decision about which role to sing, for me, that part is very important. If dramatically I don't know where the character is going, or there is very little to do, I probably say I'm not singing this role. I really need to have a journey. I like Leporello because he has a journey. I like Enrico Tavo in Anna Bolena because he has a journey. Because you can actually show different parts of his character, you know, and without the possibility of doing that, I think for me, it's very boring. To just come out, sing, move left, and leave. That's not what, for me, this job is about. You know, and I want to really put something personal to what I do.
We have a good example, I believe, of Non più andrai from Figaro. Just a very short clip. Can you listen to that? We're back to Figaro.
Non più andrai, farfallone amoroso, notte e giorno di torno girando, delle belle turbando al riposo, narcisetto adolfino d'amore. Delle belle turbando al riposo, narcisetto adolfino d'amore. Non più avrai questi bei pennacchini, quel cappello leggero e galante, quella chioma, quell'aria brillante, quel vermiglio donnesco color, quel vermiglio donnesco color. Non più avrai quei pennacchini, quel cappello, quella chioma, quell'aria brillante.
Where was this?
This is from Paris, and I believe it was 2010, and with Philip Jordan conducting, and in the old production of George Strehler. Yeah, it's great production because it was premiere in, I believe in 1984 or 5, and the figure was Van Damme.
Is that right?
Was Van Damme, so it was actually, it's nice.
Speaking of people like Van Damme, who of the older singers, who do you admire the most?
Well, the list is really long. But I have to say, in my Fach, without question, I have two favorites. One is Sam Remy, because he really sang everything from Baroque to Stravinsky. He could do anything, and he had this incredible, dark, burnished color, and I love that. And I love the fact how he went from Baroque to Rossini to bel canto, and then to have repertoire, and that I like. And in terms of voice, probably Van Damme is the one I feel the closest to. And I work with him, and and it was very funny because we were talking and said, what do you think of bass? Baritone, bass. And he said, who cares? He said to me, the most important thing is that you sing well what you sing. And he said, all my life, people have been, telling me, oh, you should sing baritone roles. Oh, you should sing bassist role. And he said, you look at the role and can you make a difference? And if it's yes, the answer, then do it.
Do it.
And he said the most important thing is always said to me, do not ever betray your color. Just sing with your voice. And he said to me, I sang Filippo II. Was it the dark, he said to me, was the darkest Filippo II ever recorded? I said, no. But I could add to the role things that a really dark bass could not do. Mm-hmm. And so as long as you can do something with it, it's you should do it. And I really appreciate that, from him.
So we're talking about your career, opera and everything. Besides that, what do you like to do?
Nothing? No, I'm just kidding. No. Look, one thing I always say to young singers, I always say you need to cultivate you as a human being to be able to be a great opera singer. I don't believe just focusing on that, on being a singer and not having any other interest makes you a phenomenal singer, because you need to be open to art, you need to read, you need to keep things that they make you an interesting person. And also for a very simple fact, at the dinner after any premiere, you would talk about music for probably 35 seconds.
Right.
And after that, it's all about anything else about music. So you need to know about what's going on in the world, because otherwise it can be kind of boring if you only talk about singer. And I think, I'm very happy and grateful because my wife has another job and she's into design. And so that keeps me really alert. And I love to go to exhibitions and museums. And I think, getting as much information from outside makes you a better person. And I believe being a better person makes you a better performer.
Definitely your capacity will be much richer.
Without question, and, because in terms of, also, I don't believe, I don't like when a singer says, oh, I never go to opera, or I never go to concert. I always go to concerts, because a lot of my musical ideas come from, a symphonic concert. I go and I see how, Alan Gilbert, for example, phrases certain things, and then I say, oh my God, maybe I can do the same thing in this piece of music. And this is really important, I think, for me.
One last question,
Sure.
very quick one.
Sure.
What is the worst nightmare about walking on the stage?
Oh, not knowing what you're doing. And that's my worst nightmare. I always have nightmares where I go first day of rehearsal and I have no idea about anything. And I mean, not even a note. And I look at the score and I'm like, I actually don't know this. And so this is really the worst nightmare.
Thank you, Luca. It's
Thank you
been
for having me.
great
I
having you
appreciate it.
here.
Thank you.
It's been
Thank
great
you. It was
talking to
fun.
you.
Thank you.
This has been Classic Talk with Bing and Dennis. Today we've been speaking with Luca Pisaroni.